Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Diversity and Talent webinar series brought to you by your Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce. My name is Omar Cuevas, and I serve as the Vice President of Investor and Corporate Relations at the Grand Rapids Chamber, and I'm going to be serving as your host for today's webinar. I'd like to start off with first recognizing those organizations that have invested in this work. I'd like to start off with thanking SpartanNash, our premier sponsor, our event underwriters, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Corewell Health, Gentex, our executive sponsors, Amway, Grand Rapids Community College, Meyer, Mercantile Bank, and Trinity Health, and our chamber champions, AHC Hospitality, Chase Creative, Erhardt Construction, Gerald R. Ford International Airport, MSU College of Human Medicine, and Rockford Construction. That said, it's my pleasure to introduce this month's presenters, Gracie Xavier with Global Detroit and Susan M. with M Law. Just yesterday, the Grand Rapids Chamber, in partnership with the American Immigration Council and the Kent County Welcome Plan Collaborative, shared the updated economic impact report of new Americans in our region. And this report shows us that immigration is a force for good in our region. This is a great way for employers to meet their talent demands of today. One of the important data points that we saw in this report, there are over 1,400 international students that call West Michigan home. And to give us a little bit more information on how to fill that talent gap, leveraging international students, please join me in welcoming Gracie Xavier, Chief Talent Strategist for Global Detroit, and Susan M., Immigration Attorney at M Law PC. So I'll turn it over to you, Gracie.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and thank you to our friends at Grand Rapids Chamber for organizing this great event. And we are so excited at Global Detroit to now be able to offer this initiative statewide and look forward to sharing some information with you today. So I'll be sharing my screen to start our presentation. Hi, my name is Gracie Xavier, and I am the Chief Talent Strategist with Global Detroit. And Global Detroit, today's agenda, we're going to work to overview Global Detroit, the work that we're doing around global talent retention, and discuss two ways in which you can tap into the international student talent through working with your university partners through CPT and OPT and explaining that process. And then we will transition to our friend Susan M., Attorney M., who will discuss how you can transition OPT and have your strategies for your H-1B. And please, some house cleaning, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat and we will be happy to answer. So the reason we're doing this today is for us in Michigan or throughout the United States, international students are predominantly group that are studying in STEM. And we right now are facing a lot of challenges with needing a lot of highly skilled talent and also facing a population decline. So Global Detroit was started through a funding from MEDC and the Detroit Chamber to look at some of the economic challenges facing the region in regards to revitalization. And so our work focuses on looking at talent, opportunity neighborhoods, and doing a lot of research in regards to immigrant inclusion economic strategies. So one of the main focus of our work, we focus in 3 programs, is how to attract, retain, and place global talent in Michigan. We run 3 core programs, and all of them sit under the Global Talent Retention Initiative, which we manage. And through the Global Talent Initiative, we work with university partners, allied partners like the Chamber and international students to create opportunities for them to connect and provide educational workshops like this one, and work in creating opportunities for them to meet, and hopefully we get students in our region placed with great opportunities with employers. To do that work, we spoke to a lot of employers and found out they had some challenges around students being ready for employment. So in 2017, 2018, we launched a Global Talent Accelerator Program, which is a intensive soft skills training for international students, focus on things like resume readiness, interview readiness, pitching, and understanding how to navigate the US job market and networking, because we were finding some students are very focused in school, but they weren't building the professional network that we all know that we need in order to tap into employment opportunities. And then our latest program, which is the Global EIR program, which is now going statewide, is looking at another way to retain great talent through looking at startup founders. So this program focuses on high growth startup international founders partnered with university partners so that they can work for the university and stay in the region to work on their high growth startup. And now we're partnered with like Michigan Tech, Wayne State, CCS, Lawrence Tech, and we're in conversation with Grand Rapids and Saginaw. So one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is that Michigan is facing a population decline. It's not only for Southeast Michigan, but it is for the entire region. One thing research shows through Open Doors is if you're looking at any state that is facing economic challenges, population decline, one of the most important things that has helped them to rebound is having a robust immigrant inclusion strategy. And here at Global Detroit, that's what we're looking at, as we're seeing that our international migration is increasing, but our domestic migration and our birth migration is either decreasing or staying very stagnant. So we started looking at how can we fill some of those gap challenges that employers were saying region through looking at international talent, specifically focused on highly skilled talent in STEM. Why are international students important to our region? The population growth has stagnated, and we're also seeing it's impacting the decline of international student enrollment. We're hoping once we get the numbers for this year that we do see some changes. We know that COVID also had an impact on the decline of international student enrollment, but once international student enrollment decline, it impacts their economic contribution to the region. For instance, once an international student enroll, you have to consider that they're especially in Michigan, they're contributing prior to the decline over $1 billion to the local economy based on them renting apartments, getting cars, books, tuition, and all of those to our region. So international students coming to study here create about 54,000 jobs through the Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois region. So they're critical to innovation. If you think about most of your patents, most of your pharmaceutical companies, 30% of all of your high growth companies like the Googles and the Facebook, they were either started or by an international founder or a child of an immigrant. So this is an important sector to our economy, and an alumni, an international alumni, if they love where they study, the likelihood shows that they will start their companies within that particular region. So the potential of international students, that's recently as Open Doors, in our area in Michigan, we had over 27,000 international students studying in the region. That's nine in the country, right? International student enrollment sustains international colleges and universities STEM program because they contribute 28% to the tuition dollars coming into the university. And international students, as of 2021, contributed over 828 million to our region. And if you're looking at the areas in which international students are studying, it's all in high-skilled STEM talent. If you're looking at most programs in the United States, 40 to 60% of all STEM programs are international student candidates. So as you can see, if you're looking at electrical engineers as of 2019, 27,000 compared to US born grad, and has with the same thing with computer sciences, industrial manufacturing, mechanical engineering, all important majors for our region. So as we are talking today, and how can we utilize OPT and CPT to tap into some of this international talent in our region, this is still new. We're still number 10 in the country. If you're looking at regions like California and New York, they don't have a program like Global Detroit because it is part of their employer's strategy to tap into the new graduating international students coming out of their area universities. So if you look at California and New York, you're seeing those numbers of OPT that they're utilizing is over 180,000 OPTs per year. We are still doing good. We're at 43,000, but we're looking to increase this number by doing things like working with our partners in the chamber and educating our employers about the process, because we understand there are a lot of myths around tapping into CPT and OPT, and we're trying to answer some of those questions today. And we also have some of our university partners that may also be on the call, and feel free to ask questions and they can contribute some of their expertise to the subject. Any questions so far? All right. Good.
If you do have any questions, please make sure that you use the question and answer function of the call, and we will get to your questions momentarily.
So OPT who study at Michigan colleges, predominantly our international students are coming from countries like China, India, Korea, and we're seeing, depending on the region you are in, you'll see students from Saudi Arabia. Now you're seeing an increase of Nigerian students. So it's based on region, but our predominant groups are coming out of China and India and Bangladesh and Southeast Asia. What we've been seeing though is that more and more students are graduating in STEM, and more employers are beginning to learn how to tap into CPT, OPT talent, you're seeing the increase of employers tapping into OPT increase. And I'm throwing a lot of acronyms for some people, they may not understand it. We are going to go
again, Gracie, can you just share again what is OPT?
Yes, and that's what we're getting into right now. Okay, how to hire an F1 international students. So international students are coming to the university. The university is the one that is holding their visa. They're here for education purposes. Can they work while they are here? The answer is yes. How can they work? They can work through two ways, and one is curriculum practical training, which is CPT, and that's usually students are eligible to seek work authorization for their CPT co-op or practicum while they're in school focused in their major area. OPT, which is optional practical training, is usually students tap into that after they've graduated, and that would require approval from USCIS. And while working on OPT, again, the student has to be working in a field that aligns to their major. All right, what is curricular practical training? Again, all of it is, think about for us in the United States, we would think about it as an apprenticeship program, right? That you're utilizing utilizing education and hands-on experience to extend what you've learned in your class. So I think if employers remember some of that, then I think CPT and OPT is very easy to navigate, right? Most universities will not let students tap into their university until they finish the first or second semester. That's usually based on a case by case by the university. Wayne State is usually after the second semester. And I think it's the same thing for Grand Valley and University of Michigan. Is after the second semester, the students can tap into their CPT. To tap into their CPT, the students would apply by receiving a job offer, right? So they first have to receive a job offer, then they can apply through their university for the CPT. There is no government application necessary to apply for the CPT. The process is done with the employer, the student, and the university, right? And the student, with the CPT, the student cannot exceed 365 days. That's the only major thing to remember, because if they do exceed 365 on, it would tap into their OPT. But prior to that, they can work. And most students use that for 20 hours, usually 20 hours a week. Some during the summer may work more because they are available during the summer. OPT, optional practical training, is the student does have to apply for this through USCIS. So it is very important that they understand the timeline, because that's always where the challenge is students will try to game it. I will be very honest with you. I've worked with the university all the time because they want to give themselves as much time work authorized as they can. So they don't want to tap in it too early, but usually gaming it is where the challenge is, because it does take a while to get your OPT process. So most universities do recommend and stress, and I know for some universities are that it is done within 3 months before graduation, because it does take at least 60 to 90 days for that to process when you're working with the government. Do you, as the employer, do you have to contribute anything to the student's OPT in regards to any cost? If there's any cost involved, it is per the student, it is not for the employer. And do they need a job offer before they can apply OPT? No, that's the difference. They can apply OPT without a job offer. They need OPT for them to be able to work. All right, and so the authorization for OPT, for regular OPT for most international student, and I say most international student, is 1 year. 1 year, everybody is approved usually for 1 year, and the student can start working once they receive their EAD card. But for the STEM students, and that's why we're here today, is for the STEM students, they can get an additional 2 years of STEM OPT, as long as they're working for an employer that is E-Verify, and they're working for more than at least 20 hours a week. And the employer has to complete, of course, an I-9083 training plan. And you will receive, it's a easy form, and I put the link here, and we will share the slide, and so that you can basically complete that with the student, and we'll show you an example of those. Any questions so far? Hey, cool. So for us to see it all at a glance, I did this nice little chart for everyone to really understand how the process works. With CPT, the student does it while they're enrolled. It requires their international student office approval and their academic department. The process now, some of these processes have moved with COVID to online. Before everything was done in hand, there is paperwork that they do have to walk. Like once they receive the job offer from you, if it's through an email or anything like that, they have to provide that to the office. But however, the employer may or may not have to be E-Verified verified at this time because it's while they're in school, and they can get paid. It can be paid or unpaid opportunities. And those processes usually go very quickly because it's just happening between the student and the university, right? And it should not exceed 12 months. For OPT, usually tap into after graduation, but the student must. So if you have a student right now interning with you on CPT, one of the best things to do is plan the strategy, how you're going to transition in from CPT for OPT. So having a conversation with them to check where are they in their graduation process, because sometimes that's where employers are calling us, they're calling the university, finding out what happened. And we all discover once we call the university that the student did not apply for the OPT on time. So once they graduated and got that job offer, they weren't able to accept it yet because they cannot start working until they get their EAD employment card, right? And so on average, it takes 3 to 5 months. But what has exciting news that has happened is now there's expedited OPT, which did not have that process at the beginning. And so this is new, where now students, it's a little pricey, but now students can apply for an expedited OPT, which costs about $1,500. That's a lot, but you'll be surprised. Some students are doing it, and we're finding out that it is speeding some of the process for those students who need it, who are delayed in their process and need it rather quickly because they received a job offer. What do you as the employer need to provide the student for a CPT? This is an example. You just provide them a job offer explaining what your company name, what's the start date, what's the end date, what's the position title, what are they going to be doing, who's going to be their supervisor, their contact person, and what does the job entail, right? And then you sign the letter and they take it to the office. But for the training plan, it's a I-983, in which you have to explain what the student will be doing. This is for your STEM OPT students. And so your STEM OPT students will need that training plan because they need to verify that this student is working in a job that aligns with their major. And Susan's online, so she's going to back me up with all of this, but it has to make sure it's aligned with their major. And you usually complete that with their supervisor, their manager, who understands what the work they're going to do. And they do get paid regular wages, right? So it's not that I think sometimes people do the students get paid no, you have to pay them the same wage that you would pay, your entry or that employee for the same position. And so if you need more information to see samples of that, we do have the link right there that you'll get when we send the slides. All right, so
Gracie, we did have a question.
Huh?
We did have a question,
yes.
And it was, again, I'm gonna make sure that we covered it in this past section. Any other requirements on the employer other than the training plan form?
Yes, you will have to be E-verified. So if you're not an E-verified employer, you can have a 1-year OPT student, but you can't have a STEM OPT student. So if you have a student right now that's starting with you, they're on OPT, and you're like, well, I would like to keep them, then you should be an E-verified. So we don't tell employers to get E-verified because I know there are some considerations for employers to think about, but that is the requirement from USCIS that the student on STEM OPT, that employer has to be E-verified. There is some cost for the student in the application process, which is very low, but it's per the student. There is no fee for the employer. And any questions? Any other questions? Good question. So we know from the last doing this, there was some frequently asked questions. So we made sure to answer those. I think people were like, well, are they quote unquote legally authorized to work? Yes, they are because the school is the one holding their visa. Their visa is per the school. Now, if the student for instance, we have this happening in real time right now. The student left U of M and transferred to another university out of state. They were working for the company and went to applied for their PhD. Well, that starts the clock over, right? So they went to a totally different university. So they have to go through that process with that university. So that's and that's sometimes how the students work to stay, because if their OPT ends, and Susan's gonna discuss H-1B, if their OPT ends and they're still interested in staying, they usually will do the next program, right? So they'll go from a bachelor's to a master's and then again to a PhD. But can they get that same cycle if they continue in the same level of degree? No, but Susan can verify that for me. So how do you continue to employ an international beyond an OPT or CPT? And that's when we're coming into the H-1B process. And I am not the one to do that for you. I think it's best to hear from an attorney. So I will transfer. Susan will join the conversation to talk about the H-1B. Susan.
Thank you so much, Gracie. That was a very thorough presentation, and welcome to everyone. I thank the Grand Rapids Chamber, Global Detroit. Oh, am I frozen? Can you hear me all?
You're good.
Great. So thank you all. I wanted to first mention that the H-1B, so it's not a virus, it's not a disease, but it is one of the most popular, most commonly used professional work visas for our foreign students, and that's why we're highlighting it today. We're also going to talk about alternatives to the H-1B, but diving right in to the H-1B. So as Gracie mentioned, it does require, this work visa category does require a U.S. employer sponsor. And by sponsoring, we mean that there must be a part-time or a full-time job offer. There is also a process that takes place with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. That's the agency that Gracie mentioned several times in her presentation. It falls under the Department of Homeland Security, and it's just the agency that accepts applications for immigration benefits like the H-1B. It requires a registration every March. And those dates in March, it's usually about a 2-week period. They're announced just before that window opens in the month of usually the end of February, March. They'll announce the registration window. This is a relatively new process, but it really benefits employers because employers have minimal investment to participate in the H-1B process. You don't have to invest thousands and thousands of dollars to begin. Now there's a registration process, which again really benefits employers in the sense that there's a $10 registration fee. Typically employers then they either work with Immigration Counsel or they do it on their own, and they do this registration with USCIS in the month of March. And the purpose of that registration, providing some basic information about the employer and some information about the student or the foreign national beneficiary that you seek to hire. It then goes into a system where USCIS conducts a completely random computer-generated lottery. A little frustrating for employers. It's a lottery system, but it's a system we have to work with. How many H-1Bs in general are available? Where there are 65,000 H-1B visas available under the regular cap. This would be for positions that require the minimum of a bachelor's degree and that the foreign national possesses a bachelor's degree or equivalent. And then USCIS provides another 20,000 H-1Bs for those students who have earned a U.S. advanced degree. That's a U.S. master's degree or higher. Interestingly enough, the degree that they earn is irrelevant to the lottery process. If, let's say, it's an electrical engineer that you, the employer, are sponsoring, and they do have to have a degree that's related to electrical engineering, something closely related to get approved. But for the master's cap, to get the benefit of the higher number of visas, You could have a master's in business, and it would still qualify you for the master's cap and increase your chances of getting selected. All right, so moving on. Can any position be offered by you, the U.S. employer, to qualify for H-1B? It has to be a specialty occupation, and that is simply in layperson terms, a position that requires the minimum of a bachelor's degree or equivalent in a field of study related to the offered job. That's all that a specialty occupation is. And the foreign national student also must possess a degree that that qualifies them, that has a sufficient link to that specialty occupation. And that's for getting approved for the H-1B. You do have to be selected in the lottery first, and you see there's only 85,000 H-1Bs to work with. And then you get to be looked at, the application is looked at on the merits. But the good news for the employer is that the fairly hefty filing fees for the H-1B petition, that you don't pay them unless you're selected in the lottery. There's only a $10 registration fee to register for the chance to be selected in the lottery. H-1Bs are available for 6 years maximum. There are some extensions beyond the 6 years available. We don't have time to get into that today, but if an employer sponsors that H-1B for green card status, that's where the extensions lie. And then finally, dual intent. H-1B is one of only two visa types, the H-1B and the L-1, that allow for dual intent. What does that mean? It just means that the student can have the temporary intent of being here to work for you, a U.S. employer, temporarily, but then concurrently desire to immigrate to the United States on a permanent basis. That's where the green card process comes into play. All right, so what are some other requirements? Because really, for H-1B employers, other than these specific requirements, it's still typically employment at will, unless there's a contract that to the contrary, right? So what are the specific additional obligations of H-1B employers? You must pay the higher of either the actual wage or the prevailing wage. What is the actual wage? Actual wage is if you are employing workers at your company in a similarly situated position. Similarly situated means, similar occupation, similar level in terms of the education and or work experience required. So if you've got a brand new electrical engineering grad and you want to sponsor them for H-1B, actual wage really only comes into play if you have other entry-level electrical engineers at your company. You need to make sure that you're paying them the actual wage of what you're paying at your company, or the prevailing wage. If you have no such people, maybe you only have senior level engineers, well, actual wage doesn't come into play. Prevailing wage is something that's established by the Department of Labor. They've got a really handy online wage database that we work with employers on to be able to give them an idea of what are they going to be required to pay the H-1B employee if they are first selected, lucky enough to be selected in the lottery, and then approved on the merits by USCIS. All right, moving on. Employers must pay the reasonable fees and costs related to the H-1B petition. So that would be, the $10 registration fee would be a best practice to make sure if the employer is paying that, that's what we advise. If you're selected in the lottery, the filing fees for the government, they currently run $460, $1,500, or $750, depending on the size of your company, and a $500 fraud fee. So that's a couple of $1,000 almost, right? And a little bit higher, depending on the size of your company. Employers should pay that. That's generally the government's position in an audit, in an H-1B audit. There's also the requirement to obtain a labor condition application, an LCA, and create what's known as a public access file. Those are fancy sounding legal terms, but essentially it's just a simple application that is prepared and filed with the Department of Labor. Immigration Council, we do this all the time. And if we've got some universities here present, there are some really great immigration managers within the universities that do this all the time as well. But the purpose of the LCA is for the employer to make certain attestations to the government saying that they're, by employing this foreign worker, that they're not going to hurt the employment of US workers. Benching is prohibited. This really only comes into play for our employers. Maybe there's some in the house that are recruiting companies, right? Or companies that place H-1B workers, place workers off-site on client sites. Employers will often ask when there's a downtime, right? The environment gets tough. We're hitting a recession. You got to bench that H-1B employee. We don't have an active project for them. That's prohibited, unfortunately, for H-1B employers. You've got to pay whatever is stated on the H-1B petition, that wage that you have represented to the government. You've got to pay that no matter what. There are things you can do. You can work with counsel to amend the H-1B, bring down the number of hours, things like that. Finally, what happens if you have to term the H-1B before the petition validity date? As I mentioned, it's employment at will, unless you have a contract to the contrary, which is fairly rare in the H-1B context. If you terminate them, just a couple of different obligations. You do have to notify the government in writing, right? We have to notify USCIS, we have to notify Department of Labor. And then we also have to make a written offer to pay the reasonable cost of return transportation, one-way ticket back to the home country. In our experience, Gracie, I don't know if you've also experienced this, it just doesn't come up that often. Our students, they want to stay. They don't typically want to go home. And so it doesn't come up often that employers are actually having to pay for a one-way ticket back home because they find a way to stay. And we're going to talk about alternatives to the H-1B.
Susan, we do have a question from the audience.
Yes.
Typically, how big is the H-1B pool of applicants in the lottery?
That is a great question. Well, we have seen it skyrocket in the past couple of years. 2 years ago, we had about 400,000 apply for those 85,000 slots. And then last year was just an anomaly. Over 800,000 applied. However, there's a silver lining. So don't fret. There's a silver lining. USCIS and many stakeholder organizations believe that there was some foul play involved, and there were multiple registrations submitted for the same foreign national beneficiary. And I know that wouldn't be any of the employers that are, with us today. And it's unfortunate, right? They just didn't play by the rules. And because of that, USCIS actually announced a second round lottery. They recognized it took them some time, several weeks, to figure out what happened here. These can't all be legitimate. I mean, they could potentially be, but they weren't. They found multiple registrations for the same foreign national, and that's a no-no, right? You don't want to do that. That's gaming the system, but gaming the system in an illegal, unfair way. So we saw a second round selection, which was wonderful. In our own experience, we saw several more of our foreign national, our employers and our foreign national beneficiaries selected, which was really exciting. And then in past years, not last year, but we saw a third round lottery announced by USCIS. And that often happens where, things change, right? Real world, real life happens where the employer had a relationship with a foreign national, they made a job offer, and then that foreign national left, and they got selected in the lottery, and they never used their slot. So some slots came back to the service and said, okay, we've got more we can select now. And also, unfortunately, some H-1B petitions get denied on the merit. Maybe they're not prepared correctly. Maybe they weren't qualifying specialty occupations or some other defect that couldn't be remedied. That number is supposed to go right back in to the pot. So great question. Any other questions out there? Great. Thanks, Omar. So I know we don't have enough time to cover all of these options to continue your employment beyond OPT and beyond the H-1B. I did put a link there to a blog we published on our website that goes into much more painstaking detail of these alternatives, because they're really important. When you hear those odds, it's easy to feel a little deflated. We hope that USCIS will address the fraud and fix that in the system next year so it can't even happen. But even so, we're looking at tough odds. H-1B cap exempt, especially for our universities that are present, this is a wonderful option. And sometimes there are surprising ways to use the H-1B cap exempt. What does it mean? It just means that you could be an employer that's exempt from this crazy, almost impossible H-1B cap and lottery altogether. If you're a higher ed institution, then you can file for H-1Bs every single day of the year with no cap. If you are a nonprofit organization that is affiliated with or related to a higher ed, you could be exempt from the cap. And there are creative ways to do that. We've worked with a lot of organizations to create cap exemption, or they might have been in the process of developing that relationship. There's even a way where, well, we'll talk about two really interesting ways, where you could be a for-profit organization, but you're working in conjunction with the higher ed to place that foreign national worker to work primarily, or maybe full-time, at that higher ed. There's a way, if you're fulfilling the mission of that higher ed institution and other requirements, to fall under the cap exemption. Other things that we want to talk about are other visa categories that are based on treaties or your nationality, the TN, trade NAFTA. So this was created, it's for Canadian and Mexican citizens only. But those lucky Canadian and Mexican citizens, there are 65 different occupations through which they can qualify for the TN. And for Canadians, they get to apply right at the port of entry. They don't even deal with USCIS and a petition process there. Very simple process. And then for Mexican citizens, just another additional step. They do have to apply at a US consulate abroad. The E3 and the H1B1, those funny little acronyms that Gracie was talking about. The E3 it mirrors the H1B that we just covered. It is only for Australians, but those lucky Aussies, such a great opportunity. They can apply with USCIS, or they can go back home or to any US consulate abroad and apply for the E3. The cap is 10,500 fiscal year. It's never been hit to my knowledge. H1B1, it's for the lucky Singaporeans and Chileans. Also, no, there is a cap, but they haven't ever hit. So always keep that in mind for those lucky Chile and Singaporeans. I won't go over the re-enrolling in school and CPT. Gracie covered that wonderfully. So we won't go over that. The O1s. So some of you may notice, if you're a soccer fan, that I have Lionel Messi on the wall behind me. I've got a soccer player son. And anyway, so he probably, my assumption, I did not handle his immigration case, but he probably came on an O1. If you are an individual that possesses sustained national or international acclaim in your field of expertise, no limit to the fields of expertise. Could be, we've done O1s for those in the science and the tech. We've done them for startups, done them for the researchers, but we've also done them for celebrity chefs, for athletes, for just really interesting niches, literature, people that have made their name in a really interesting niche of literature. We're working on an O1 right now for a financial professional, but they do have to prove that sustained national or international acclaim. And we do have some really great beefed up guidance from USCIS came out under this current Biden administration to encourage more O1s for STEMs. And so, yeah, we've got, you can pass H-1B and move right to PERM and green card process. Not a lot of time to talk about that, but please feel free to visit the link that I have on this slide there for more information on initiating green card status for foreign students. We've done this successfully for our foreign students that are not subject to very strict country quotas. That would be, unfortunately, it doesn't apply to those that were born in China or India. Because of the high demand for visas from those countries, Congress put a pretty strict country quota on there, and that's unfortunate. But so the green card, moving straight to green card and not finding a temporary visa fit doesn't work as well for them. But for other countries of birth, it goes by country of birth, it's definitely a valid strategy. The L1 and the E1 you can read a little bit about. Those are lesser known options. They do come up in certain categories where for the L1, we've got our multinational companies have presence abroad, right? And if you, for instance, this doesn't happen often with our foreign students that are on F1 status right now, but if you had the ability to send the student to your subsidiary in Canada, your subsidiary in Germany, your subsidiary in China for a year, and work in one of three capacities: managerial, executive, or specialized knowledge. You can bring them back on an L1 visa and possibly even set them up for a more streamlined green card process. The e-visas, they're tied to treaty trading and treaty investing. Again, some creative uses of that, especially because in West Michigan, we've got a lot of foreign-owned companies. And we work with a lot of the foreign-owned companies. For instance, some German-owned companies, a lot of German parents, companies interested in our area, thanks to the great efforts of the Grand Rapids Chamber in the right place, fantastic at what they do. But if you happen to hold the same nationality, you're a foreign student, you hold the same nationality as a foreign-owned company that located here in Michigan, wonderful. You might have an E1 or an E2 option just by virtue of the same nationality. Something to look at. So yeah, that in a nutshell are the options to continue employment beyond OPT and beyond the H-1B. Thank you so much for letting me speak about that for a few minutes today.
Oh, thank you, Susan. As I'm looking at all these visas, and I'm thankful that both you and Gracie are going to be making these PowerPoints available to us so that we can share with everyone who registered for this workshop. That said, if there are any more questions, we can entertain them right now.
Hopefully we didn't scare you off.
No. And just as we look at fielding potentially any questions, I want to give everyone an update. Our next Diversity and Talent webinar is going to be on Tuesday, September 26th. We'd love to have you join us. Registration, I believe, is open online.
Here's our
Looks
information.
like we've exhausted. What's that,
Yeah.
Gracie?
I was saying, here's our information. If you all have any questions in regards to the process, we are scheduling one-on-one with employers who want, more specialized answers, and for us to walk them through the process of the CPT and OPT. I know a lot of employers work through their career service office, but it's also great to learn who are your contacts in the International Student Office. And if you have any questions, we have some of that information on the Global Detroit website for you to see who's the contact in particular universities. But we're happy to meet with you one-on-one to answer some of those questions, or if you need more information on the legalese, to contact us or Susan. Great.
And that said, I want to share that soon, and we'll be announcing that soon, Gracie, we're going to have someone from Global Detroit at our office, so that if there are any employers that want more information, all you have to do is come to your chamber and we'll be able to connect you to those resources. I want to thank you all again for attending. Following this event, you'll receive a survey asking how likely are you to recommend programs like this to others from the Grand Rapids Chamber. Your feedback is very important to us, as it allows us to continually enhance our events and programs and the experience we provide you. Please take a couple of minutes to share your thoughts with us. That said, I want to thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for connecting to your Grand Rapids Chamber.